Well, g'day folks, and welcome to week number 36 here on our Chronological Bible-in-a-Year reading challenge. And week number 2 dealing specifically with the prophet Ezekiel. Like all the Old Testament prophets, he is full of doom and gloom, especially over neighbouring nations, but also hints of hope when it comes to prophesying the future restoration of God's people. And you're going to see that this week as we read chapters 23 to 42. Of course, if you want to finish the book of Ezekiel this week, you're more than welcome to, okay? That's okay, because we've got a big week coming up next week as well. But in the meantime, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's tutorial. We are up to week number 36 in our reading plan. We are delving well and truly into the story and the life and the ministry and the prophecy and the book of a man called Ezekiel. All right, so last week we read the first 22 chapters. We noted that Ezekiel was a captive from Jerusalem. He was actually a priest that was taken away by Nebuchadnezzar with thousands of other people to Babylon, and that happened in around about 10 years before Jerusalem was eventually destroyed. Now, Jeremiah and other prophets were there in the city while that was happening. Ezekiel was not. He was taken away into captivity and was around about 5 years into his captivity that God commissioned him. He started his ministry. He prophesied to the captives there in Babylon and does all the normal stuff that Old Testament prophets do. He prophesies doom and gloom, and he prophesies hints of hope for God's people into the future. So in many ways he's very similar to other prophets, but in many ways, of course, he is very unique. He has very mystical encounters. He sees things. He's taken away in vision. Even though he's in Babylon, God takes him, lifts him up by the hair, and he goes to see what's taking place in the temple at Jerusalem. Being a priest, he is very preoccupied with a focus on the temple and the glory of God therein. So I hope you saw a lot of that last week as you read the first 22 chapters. This week, we are reading another 20 chapters according to our program from 23 through to 42. However, if you want to sneak in the last few chapters and just finish off Ezekiel, I encourage you to do that. In fact, my video today, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the rest of Ezekiel, okay? And one of the reasons I want to do that is because next week I want to focus on Joel and Daniel. Oh, how exciting, okay. So I'm basically going to give you a summary today that goes through to the end of Ezekiel, even though that's not specifically on our program, okay? Hope that's okay. Here we go. 3 things I want you to notice as you read the rest of Ezekiel this week. Firstly, there are 11 chapters or so that you're going to be reading where he focuses his prophecies on foreign nations and basically has a go at them because they have mistreated God's people over time. Now, we've seen this before, okay? This is very typical for God to do because way back in Genesis 12, he said to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. So even though other nations have been taking advantage of Israel or invading them or plundering them or not helping them, God has helped to orchestrate that, but at the same time, he's also faithful to his covenant promise. And he says to those nations, you know what? You're not going to get away with this. You're not going to get away with treating my people poorly. Okay, so all the usual suspects are there. Ezekiel mentions, who is it? Edom and Egypt and the Philistines and Tyre, okay, and Ammon and Moab, all these guys. What is interesting that, you know, Jeremiah and Isaiah and Zephaniah also prophesied against. However, one nation that he doesn't mention conspicuously is Babylon. Babylon are the ones who are plundering them. Babylon are the ones who are doing them, as it seems, the most harm, and yet he doesn't seem to mention them. And well, you might think that's wise. After all, Ezekiel is in Babylon. You know, you're not going to prophesy against Babylon while you're there, you know, off with his head type of thing. But a lot of people believe that he does speak against Babylon, but he uses cryptic language. You're going to read 2 chapters this week where he prophesies against a group of people we've never heard of before called Gog in Magog. Who are these people? Well, when you take the letters, the Hebrew letters for Gog, there is a cryptic code there, some say, where it actually spells out Babylon. Okay, so you can look up that if you like, but it's possible he actually does prophesy against Babylon. That's not really the point today. The point is this: as with all apocalyptic prophecy, I really want you to pay attention to the language. It is very creative. It is very exaggerated. When he talks to Egypt and he says, you know, the sword of Babylon's going to come against you, he describes describes that as the moon turning dark and the stars being blackened and falling from the sky, and the hearts of the people, they're melting with fear. All right, this is apocalyptic language where basically God is saying lights out for that group of people, and he uses exaggerated heaven falling language. It's important to notice that because that is the way prophets speak, and we're going to see that continue through other prophets as well. All right, so just take note of the language. Even if you don't understand everything that's going on or why it's going on, pay attention to how prophets speak. There is something happening practically, but they describe that in very exaggerated, prophetic, or what we might say apocalyptic terms. That's the first thing you're going to notice. He prophesies against foreign nations. But second thing you're going to notice, of course, is that most of his ministry is towards God's people, Judah, Jerusalem, or basically what basically is left of Israel. So often he just calls them Israel. Okay, and as with all the other prophets, it's a lot of doom and gloom with hints of hope. And what I love about Ezekiel is he borrows some language from the other prophets that are really great. He talks about God's people being his bride or his wife that committed adultery and that deserves to be stoned to death, okay? But within that doom and gloom, there's a hint of hope because he promises to re-covenant with them in the future, basically to remarry this adulterous wife. So he, like other prophets before him, uses that language. He talks about God's people being sheep of his pasture, that God's shepherds have not looked after. God himself says, I will judge the shepherds and I myself will look after my sheep. I will be a good shepherd, okay, to my sheep, and I will appoint David to be shepherd over them as I gather them together in one sheep pen. All right. I wonder who could have fulfilled that prophecy. So he calls them sheep, and he also refers to them as an army that's dead, a valley of dry bones, like a dead, defeated army that he promises to breathe resurrection life into. And so with all this bad analogy, there's always hints of hope, remarriage, return to the land, restoration or reunification as one kingdom, resurrection to new life. And also he finishes his book by describing the rebuilding of a new temple, a new city, and the distribution or the redistribution of the promised land again. And that is where he finishes. The third thing you're going to witness this week, the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel are devoted to a vision that he has 14 years after Jerusalem's destroyed. All right, so this is 20 years since he started his ministry. Jerusalem has been taken out, the temple's been destroyed. 14 years later, God takes him again back to the Temple Mount, which is desolated in real terms. But he's there in his vision and he sees a temple that has not yet been built. And he dedicates 9 chapters to that temple, that city, and the redistribution of the promised land once more to the 12 tribes. Although the distribution looks very different to what it did when Moses or Joshua came into the promised land. All right. And this week, I just want to let you know there's a lot of debate and discussion on the meaning of this vision. When will it be fulfilled? Was it fulfilled? Will it ever be fulfilled? After all, is it a conditional promise that God's people didn't meet the conditions and so it's a promise, but it would never be fulfilled because they forfeited their right to it? Is it yet to be fulfilled in our future, or was it fulfilled 70 years later when the remnants returned? These are big discussions that all are legitimate to have because prophecy, as we know, is not crystal clear. God uses creative language, apocalyptic language. He uses visions and dreams, and we're not 100% sure whether these are supposed to be fulfilled physically or whether this speaks of a greater spiritual reality that ultimately is fulfilled in Jesus in the 1st century. Okay, this is where debate and discussion and dialogue comes in. However, no matter what it reads, just read it. No matter what it meant, it'll be good for you to read it this week and see what is communicating to the people at the time. All right, is giving some substance in their mind to this future restoration, future rebuilding, and a future return to the promised land. All right, enjoy Ezekiel this week. I hope you get a lot out of it. If you can finish it off, as I said, that's great. Next week, we're going to have a look at Joel, who's a minor prophet, and Daniel, who is our 4th and final major prophet. And so we're going to get a lot out of him. Bless you guys. That's my 10 minutes almost up. And I'll catch you next week. Enjoy your school holidays. Bye. That's it for today's lesson. I really hope you enjoy your readings this week. Remember, allow yourself time to read as much as you can in one sitting. Don't get lost in the detail. Just keep going and watch the Bible's big story unfold before you. Remember also to hit me up on our social media channels or website, and I'll see you next time.